Now, the issue we're going to be dealing with this week is a very multifaceted one. It's a personal issue, it's a cultural issue, it's an institutional issue. It's a personal issue because in terms of preferences on, let's say, air travel, there's issues of comforts, there's issue of status involved. It's a cultural issue because related to conference issues, there's also visits, there are also issues of status. And it's institutional because in the age of tax breaks on kerosene and the related cheap airfares, and it's interesting, I just picked out an advert from the paper a couple of days ago. It's in German, but it's advertising 10,000 flights, Vienna, Rome, or similar for 98 euros return. So we have these sort of pressures on the one, and then pressures on research budgets and the urge to take the cheapest option on the other hand, which means that air travel, for the most part, trumps train travel or other more sustainable means of traveling. Alongside that, we currently also work in an academic system which not only rewards, but also expects high carbon activity, such as flying to conferences to present papers. In this context, a colleague from Switzerland, Barbara Bleich, from Zurich, has coined the very fitting term conference tourism. And whilst she accepts that a certain level of travel is necessary, indeed good, and has multiple co-benefits, we all know the sort of the discussions at the conference dinner following the day at the conference where we really get to know our colleagues, develop ideas and so on. I think it's also it's a question of how many, how much of this we do. And she also questions whether sort of in the academic world, attending meetings in Paris today, Helsinki tomorrow, and Boston on Wednesday, how she has put it, whether we're really making a positive contribution to teaching and research, quite apart from the environmental impact we're having when jetting around. Now, we're all aware of what's at stake. On the one hand, when we urge the world to reduce their carbon emissions, but continue to jet around ourselves, then firstly, that's inconsistent, and on the other hand, credibility suffers, which is a point so eloquently made by the chair of Session 4 tomorrow, Erica Thompson, from the London School of Economics. We're also aware that any carbon dioxide we emit today will spend roughly 100 years in the atmosphere, further warming the planet. And yet, despite that knowledge, the emissions related to climate science and policy are rising. We're going to hear plenty of examples of this later on in the next session, but I'd just like to throw one number into the room. It relates to the 15th Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC in 2009 in Copenhagen, and the emissions of that conference were over 70,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And for the particular relevance to this conference, over 90% of those emissions came from air travel. Now, just to give you a couple of comparisons, that's the equivalent of the fuel-related emissions of driving a small car the distance from the Earth to the Moon and back again 700 times. It's also the equivalent to 10% of the annual emissions of Rwanda, a country of 9 million people. And I think just with those examples, we see sort of the significance of the carbon emissions of the research system and policy systems, but also the potential that lies there in reducing those emissions. And I think that's the reason why we're all here today. Now, the title of the conference suggests the climate impact of the research system as a whole. And whilst obviously many factors affect the emissions of an institutions, buildings, resource use, and so on, factors which will also be introduced and addressed in session 3 tomorrow within CFCR, Climate Friendly Climate Research, an acronym you'll probably hear a few times in the next few days. We've made the explicit choice to focus on travel and meetings, and I think there are a few good reasons for that. On the one hand, aviation emissions are responsible for a significant and growing proportion of research emissions. Above that, globally, aviation emissions already contribute to around 5% of global emissions are also on the rise. Now, before I hand you over, I would just like to point out a couple of positive points as well. We don't need to look merely at the challenges. And I think on the positive side, there are many solutions on offer, and we'll see some of those in sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday. There are innovative ideas being circulated regarding conferences, such as limiting participation and at the same time granting fairer access to participants from the Global South, as Professor Ed Hall from Dundee has suggested. There are new models for collaboration, as Seth Baum from the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute will explain to us later on today. And there are research institutions which are actively reducing the carbon footprint of their activities, as Ruth Wood from the Tyndall Centre will show on Thursday. Beyond content-related issues, I'd also urge you to see this conference itself as a room for learning and experimenting.